Good morning. My name is Matt Bennett. I'm Vice President for Public Affairs at Third Way, and it's a great honor for Third Way to co-host this event this morning with the Wilson Center. Now, though we're only 2.5 years old, Third Way has been privileged to work closely with Majority Leader Reid and with his fantastic team on a number of issues, including national security in general and Iraq in particular. We've always admired his leadership, his vision, and his toughness in standing up for what he believes in, what he believes is in the best interest of the American people. In fact, we believe that this combination of traits, combined with this unique moment in history, have made Harry Reid the most important Senate leader in decades. He stood firmly against the conservative tide as minority leader, and he battled them to a standstill on many issues. And now, America is lucky to have a man with the wisdom, the judgment, and the strength of Harry Reid serving as majority leader at this hour of reckoning for the United States. Harry Reid doesn't seek out battles, but he doesn't shy from them either. When he believes the best interests of the United States are on the line, he will fight hard to take this country in the right direction. And as we will hear in a moment, Senator Reid believes, as we do, that matters of enormous national importance are on the line right now, and that America's future at Iraq is at a crossroads. We believe that continuing down the path that this country is on would be a tragic, potentially catastrophic mistake, compounding the already grievous errors of this administration. And we are eager to hear the Majority Leader's ideas on how the nation moves forward from here, and Third Way stands ready to help him in this struggle in any way that we can. But before we hear from Senator Reid, it is my great honor to introduce the man who runs the Wilson Center and the co-host of this event. Now, as Lee Hamilton no doubt remembers as if it were yesterday, I was an intern in his office in the summer of 1985. Of course, I was one of approximately 800 interns that served in his office during his 39-year tenure in Congress, so maybe he doesn't remember. For that matter, he's had a good deal on his mind in the years since, as chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the Iran-Contra hearings, the 9/11 Commission, the Iraq Study Group, and as a member of countless other bodies, commissions, panels, and investigations. In short, Mr. Hamilton has helped guide this country through some of its most difficult passages, and there is basically no American leader who knows more about international relations and the Middle East in particular than Lee Hamilton. Moreover, for me, and for scores of others who passed through his office, Mr. Hamilton has made an indelible mark with his keen intellect, deep knowledge, abounding cultural sensitivity, and extraordinary commitment to public service. Sir, I thank you for the inspiration that you provided for me and for my fellow Americans, and I thank you for the honor of introducing you today, ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Wilson Center, Lee Hamilton.
Thank you very much, Matt. You can be assured that I never forgot you, even among the 800 or so. It's a great pleasure to be with Matt to introduce the Majority Leader. And the Wilson Center is pleased to co-host with the Third Way this session. The Third Way, of course, is an organization that adds an innovative and intelligent voice to public policy debates in this country. Senator Reid, here at the Wilson Center, as you know, our mission is to bridge the worlds of scholarship and policy. We honor the only President of the United States to hold a PhD, and we honor him by advancing the notion that the academician and the public official, the journalist and the scientist and the businesswoman must join together in a vigorous dialogue to address the great issues of the day. Today, there is no issue that surpasses Iraq on America's agenda. Americans care deeply about this war. That is always the case when we have young people in harm's way. And Americans are engaged in a passionate debate about how to address a situation that has been grave and deteriorating in a part of the world where America has critical national interests. We are privileged to hear from one of the nation's foremost political leaders, Senator Harry Reid of Nevada, the Majority Leader of the United States Senate. Harry was elected to the House in 1982. He served 2 terms with me on the Subcommittee on Europe and the Middle East on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. I remember when the subcommittees would come into session, Harry, you may not remember this, but he would come to me at the beginning of every session with a question. And the question to me was, Lee, how can I help? Now, every person in this room has been a chairman or chairperson of a committee, and you know how valuable a member of that committee is when they come to the chairman and say, how can I help you? But that comment of his says a lot about why he has succeeded so remarkably as a legislator and as a politician and as a person. In 1986, Harry was elected to the first of his 4 terms in the United States Senate. Since then, he's worked to advance education and health care and then the environment. And of course, he's been a tireless advocate for his home state of Nevada. In 1998, his Democratic colleagues chose him to be the party whip. In 2004, he was chosen unanimously to be the Democratic leader. And that job is surely one of the toughest in this town. Senator Reid's story is perhaps even more notable than the office that he holds. He was born, still lives, in a very small Nevada mining town of Searchlight. He rose from humble means to go to law school here in Washington, working nights on Capitol Hill as a Capitol Hill police officer to support his family. Back in Nevada, he began his steady rise through public life. Attention, of course, from Washington to Searchlight to Baghdad is now focused on the current standoff between the President and the Congress over the pending supplemental funding bill on Iraq. Senator Reid joins us today to have a conversation about how to move forward in Iraq. If you are interested in asking him a question after his remarks, please write it down on cards that I think have been made available and pass it to Maria Stella Godsolis. Senator Reid, we welcome you to the Wilson Center, and we welcome and look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much, Lee. Senator Johns, good to see you. Appreciate your advice over these last many weeks. Coming into the building, I was told that Boris Yeltsin died. I had the good fortune of being able to meet him and watched him help bring Russia into the modern world, and I think we all recognize the great contributions that he made to world peace. Matt, thank you very much. Lee, of course, thank you. Third Way and the Wilson Center for allowing me to be here. And thank you, Lee. I first came to know you, as you've indicated, when I came to the House of Representatives. It was admiration at first sight as I served with you on the Foreign Affairs Committee. Also, for your work on the 9/11 Commission, the Iraq Study Group, America owes you a special debt of gratitude. In that historic report, you and former Secretary of State Jim Baker, along with 8 other Republicans and Democrats, said this: our political leaders must build a bipartisan approach to bring a responsible conclusion to what is now a lengthy and costly war. Our country deserves a debate that prizes substance over rhetoric, and a policy that is adequately funded and sustainable. The President and Congress must work together. Our leaders must be candid and forthright with the American people in order to win their support. End of quote. But just weeks after that report, President Bush ignored the call for bipartisan cooperation. He went in the opposite direction, and he went alone by ordering his troop surge, a plan that ignored the advice of the Iraq Study Group, ignored the will of the people, and dismissed the advice of many of his own generals. Now in the fifth year of President Bush's mismanagement and mistakes, there's no magic formula, but there is a way forward that gives us our best chance for a responsible end to the war that protects our strategic interests, strengthens our security, and brings our troops home. That way forward is being forged today in Congress with the help and advice of Democrats and Republicans, civilian experts, retired generals, as well as the good judgment of the American people who have made their voices heard loud and clear. So today I speak of where things stand on the ground in Iraq and in the public discourse at home. I also speak of why an Iraq strategy that a bipartisan majority in Congress supports is our best way forward. We're at a critical point in the Iraq War, in the Iraq debate here at home. I'm proud of the role the Senate and the House are playing in this historic debate. It's a constructive and long overdue effort to put some spine in our policy. The very existence of this debate has already helped. The President's own Defense Secretary, Robert Gates, said in recent days, "The debate is essential to progress, that our efforts have been helpful to communicate to the Iraqis that American patience is limited." Secretary Gates is right. American patience is limited. As a people's representatives, our patience is also limited. Back in December, the Iraq Study Group said that the situation is grave and deteriorating. And that's the end of the quote. Unfortunately, since then, nothing has changed. And yet the President on Friday used the word progress no fewer than 10 times when he gave his Iraq update. He said that while there were still horrific attacks in Baghdad, and I quote, "the direction of the fight is beginning to shift." In describing his escalation of American troops, what he calls a surge, he further said, "So far the operation is meeting expectations," end of quote. The White House transcript says the President made those remarks in the state of Michigan. I believe he made them in the state of denial. These are the facts on the ground, the hard truths facing our heroic troops on the front lines. American casualties are increasing, not decreasing. 4 coalition troops have been killed each day this month, making it one of the deadliest months in the war in over 2 years. My home state of Nevada has lost 27 since the war began, and hundreds remain in harm's way, facing some of the most violent days since the war began. Untold thousands of Iraq civilians have died, while over 2 million more have fled the country as refugees. The President used to talk a lot about establishing benchmarks for the Iraqi people, the Iraqi government. Yet despite our surge in troops and spending, they have failed to take meaningful steps toward achieving them. Militias have not been disbanded and continue to cause terror. And now the Iraqi government itself, once the Bush administration's greatest pride, stands on the brink of chaos. Progress on amending the Constitution in order to ensure minority rights has languished, giving further fuel to sectarian fighting. Power, clean water, and oil production, all of which are critical to establishing any kind of economic stability, are still not meeting minimum targets, leaving millions in despair. 70% of Iraqi children are suffering from trauma-like nightmares, bedwetting, stuttering, and fear that some say could paralyze an entire generation that we've been counting on to harvest the seeds of democracy. And to make up for the shortages of combat-ready troops, tours of duty have been extended recently from 12 to 15 months, with many soldiers now on their 3rd or 4th, and some on their 5th tours of duty. In short, there is no evidence that the escalation is working, and it should come as no surprise because General Petraeus has said the ultimate solution in Iraq is a political one, not a military one. And General Abizaid said, and I quote, "It is easy for the Iraqis to rely upon us to do this work. I believe that more American forces prevent the Iraqis from doing more, from taking more responsibility for their own future." End of quote. Prior to this troop surge, President Bush had called for 3 surges, and each time they failed. Yet, despite this writing on the wall, he sent even more troops to battle and asked again for our patience. It has now been 3 months, and despite the President's happy talk, no progress has been made. The time for patience is long past. The philosopher George Santayana once wrote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." End of quote. I remember when President Johnson, trying to save his political legacy, initiated the first of many surges into Vietnam in 1965. At this point, the United States had lost a few thousand troops in Vietnam. Following the surges, by the end of the war, more than 50,000 more were added to that casualty list. We cannot afford to forget the past, nor should our president condemn us to repeat it. He is the only person who fails to face this war's reality, and that failure is devastating, not just for Iraq's future, but for our future. Major General John Batiste, who had commanded the 1st Infantry Division in Iraq, says this, I quote, "Here is the bottom line. Americans must come to grips with the fact that our military alone cannot establish a democracy. We cannot sustain the current operational tempo without seriously damaging the Army and Marine Corps. Our troops have been asked to carry the burden of an ill-conceived mission." End of General Abizaid's quote. As our troops carry that burden, our nation's ability to meet other challenges and face down other foes is being dangerously eroded. We should be addressing a nuclear Iran, and we should be addressing the resurgence of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, and we should be addressing the instability and genocide in Africa, and we should be addressing democratic retrenchment in Russia, and we should be addressing anti-Americanism in Latin America. These challenges require American leadership, and they will determine our future in the world. As conditions deteriorate in Iraq, and our world focus continues to narrow, we must choose a new direction. One road leads to endless war, with consequences for America's future security extending well past the borders of Iraq. The other road leads to a responsible end, gives Iraq the best chance for success, and allows us to refocus on the challenges we face throughout the world. Some in the administration and Congress deny that choice exists. According to President Bush, there is no plan B. He tells us it's surge or nothing. He tells us it's stay the course or fail. With all due respect, our president is wrong, and the new Congress will show him the way. A viable strategy for Iraq does not require a surge. Well, it does. It requires a surge, but not a surge in troops. We need a surge in diplomacy to bring warring factions to the negotiating table. And we need a surge in accountability to compel the Iraqi people to take responsibility for their own destiny, the destiny of their own country. The president has done just the opposite. He has put the burden of solving Iraq's problems squarely on the shoulders of American men and women in uniform. He has failed to work toward a regional consensus and a new framework for security in the Middle East. He has failed to launch any meaningful diplomatic efforts, and he has failed to address the corruption and mismanagement that continue to plague the reconstruction efforts, costing American taxpayers billions of dollars. It is unquestioned that we have long-term security interests in seeing Iraq become stabilized, peaceful, and yes, one day a functioning democracy. The president's current path does not take us there. But let me offer you that different course, one that is supported by majorities of the House and the Senate, and I believe reflects the will of the military leaders and the American people. Our first step immediately transitions the U.S. mission away from policing a civil war to training and equipping Iraqi security forces, protecting U.S. forces, and conducting targeted counterterrorism operations. This transitions our mission to one that is aligned with U.S. strategic interests, while at the same time reducing our combat footprint. U.S. troops should not be interjecting themselves between warring factions, kicking down doors, trying to sort Shia from Sunni, friend from foe. Our second step calls for beginning the phased redeployment of our troops no later than October 1st of this year, with a goal of removing all combat forces by April 1st, 2008, except for those carrying out the limited missions I just mentioned. This puts pressure on the Iraqis to make the desperately needed political compromises. Excuse me. It reduces the specter of U.S. occupation and gives fuel to the insurgency. It allows some of our forces to be moved to other areas of the world where they're needed, such as Afghanistan. And it allows our badly strained military force a chance to rebuild, with not a single non-deployed Army unit battle ready as I speak. This is critically important. Our third step imposes tangible, measurable, and achievable benchmarks on the Iraqi government so that they will be held accountable for making progress on security, political reconciliation, and improving the lives of ordinary Iraqis who have suffered so much. Our fourth step launches the kind of diplomatic, economic, and political offensive that the present strategy lacks, starting with a regional conference working toward long-term framework for stability in the region. And our fifth, it rebuilds our overburdened military to give them the manpower and support they need to face the daunting challenges that lie ahead. We call for an end to the deployment of non-battle ready forces, and we include billions of dollars to improve the military health system. Our 5-point plan is part of the $120 billion emergency supplemental bill the Senate passed with bipartisan support. Today, our House and Senate Conference Committee is meeting to hammer out the details of this bill, and we're going to send it to the President. We worked out the last few problems just a few minutes ago. It will contain the elements I've just outlined. This plan is a strategy for success. President Bush's response has not been to rebut our plan on the merits, but rather to attack us for developing a plan, a new plan. And in an all too familiar tactic, he's deployed the Vice President as his chief attack dog. This is the same Vice President who has said Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, that we would be greeted as liberators, and that we know Saddam Hussein had links to al-Qaeda. To suggest he lacks credibility would be an understatement. The Vice President demeans himself and diminishes his office by offering wildly irresponsible and inaccurate attacks on us and our strategy. He seems more interested in sound bites than sound policy, and his record shows it. You deserve to know the facts. First, our strategy is responsible, strategically driven redeployment, not a precipitous withdrawal. Troops in harm's way will always have the resources, I repeat, always have the resources, to do the mission their leaders ask of them. Second, it ensures that al-Qaeda remains on the run, addresses refugee and humanitarian crises, and launches the diplomatic and political surges necessary to prevent regional instability. It allows us to provide the longer-term investments in the political solutions that are needed in Iraq. It prevents the jihadists from being able to claim victory over America and begins to restore America's prestige, power, and influence in the region and in the world. In the supplemental spending bill, we're sending the administration a strong message that the American people want a new direction. Nonetheless, I understand the restlessness that some feel. Many who voted for change in November anticipated dramatic and immediate results in January. But like it or not, George Bush is still the commander-in-chief, and this is his war. We've made tremendous progress this year, but it has come with a slim majority of 51 in a body that requires 60 to do business. This means every step forward has required the cooperation of Republicans who are willing to put partisanship aside. But there have only been a few of them, and every day we hope to find a few more, forcing them to make the choice of sticking with an isolated president or standing on the side of the American people. As long as the president remains obstinate and his Republican allies stick with him, we will continue to face an uphill climb. But the American people deserve to know that we hear them and we're standing up for them. The president has had a long time to dig the ditch we're in. A long time. And we're working every day very hard to dig out of that deep ditch. The Iraq supplemental bill is only one step in that process, and we have used our new majority to change course at every opportunity. We passed the recommendations of the 9/11 Commission in 2 months, something the previous Congress couldn't do in more than 2 years. After 5 years of silence from Congress, Iraq is now openly debated on the Senate floor, and as a result, bipartisan majority supported 2 resolutions expressing our determined opposition to the President's war policy. And we have finally administered real oversight. The Founders mandated checks and balances by virtue of our Constitution. They did it for good reason. But until this year, Congress gave the President a rubber stamp and a blank check. As Thomas Ricks wrote in his book Fiasco, a great book, which was a searing indictment of the Iraq War, and I quote, "There were many failures in the American system that led to the war, but the failures in Congress were at once perhaps the most important and the least noticed," end of quote. But no more will Congress turn a blind eye to the Bush administration's incompetence and dishonesty. We have already held more than 50 hearings on Iraq. We have already exposed the false and misleading evidence the administration sold the world and the American people as it swaggered toward war. We may not be able to prevent President Bush from vetoing our supplemental bill, but we can and will keep trying to change his mind. What a shame that after 5.5 years, after so many lost lives and so much treasury depleted, President Bush hasn't budged from the shoot first, talk never style that one national magazine described as cowboy diplomacy that got us into the mess in the first place. Winning this war is no longer the job of the American military. Our courageous troops have done everything asked of them and more. They routed the Iraq military, captured Baghdad in days, deposed and then captured the dictator. The failure has been political, it's been policy, it's been presidential. The President has dug in his heels in this fight, but it doesn't have to be that way. Only through accommodation on both sides and some degree of compromise can we make progress. We're anxious to have that conversation, but so far the President is not. Democrats are reaching out to Republicans in Congress in hopes of more bipartisan cooperation. Only the President is the odd man out, and he's making the task even harder by demanding absolute fidelity from his party. We don't have meetings with the President, not real substantive meetings. He holds carefully scripted sessions where he repeats his talking points. Yes, he is our President, but we are the people's representatives. We will meet him anytime he calls upon us to discuss war policy. But he owes it to us to listen as we represent the American people. Our timetable is fair and it's reasonable. We have put our plan on the table. If the President disagrees, let him come to us with an alternative. If he believes more time is needed, let him tell us why. If he has new benchmarks finally holding the Iraqis accountable, let him propose them. If he says repeatedly, what he does say, he says repeatedly, we cannot leave until we have achieved victory. Let him define victory. Instead of sending us back to square one with a veto, some tough talk and nothing more, let him come to the table in the spirit of bipartisanship that Americans demand and deserve. The night before the 9/11 Commission report was released more than 3 years ago, I met with Lee Hamilton in the Capitol. He told me something that night that I will never forget. He said that there are a finite number of terrorists who must be killed or captured. Nothing we can do will rehabilitate or deter them. But beyond those few who must be hunted lies a large and growing population of millions who sit precariously on the fence. They will either condemn or contribute to terrorism in the years ahead, said Lee Hamilton. So I say we must convince them of the goodness of America and Americans. We must win them over. This is the great challenge of our time. If we fail this so-called war on terror, it'll become a multi-generational struggle. If we succeed, we can protect our national security, rebuild our battered and betrayed military, and fight a real war on terrorism that drives the terrorists back into the darkest corners, caves, and crevices of human existence. But to win that war, we must choose a new path in Iraq. The choice is ours, all of ours, and now is our time to make it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You just want to stand there, Harry? Okay. Senator Reid has a few minutes to take a few questions. As I indicated in my remarks, we've asked some of you to write down some questions, and I have a few of them before me. Senator, the first question is, what happens after the President vetoes the supplemental? What's the next step?
I would hope that the President would talk to us. We're going to make sure that the troops have everything they need and there's a change in direction. How that's accomplished is up to the President. We stand ready, willing, and talk to him at any time.
The second question is, if phased redeployment of U.S. troops targets only al-Qaeda in specific counterterrorism operations, what should U.S. forces do if Sunni and Shia militias launch genocidal slaughter of each other's communities? In other words, what would they do about a civil war?
I would say, Lee, that we have a civil war going on now, and there is attempts by both sides to eliminate the other. The Sunnis are in the minority, of course, and 20-25% of them are Sunnis. It would seem to me that our suggestion, our recommendation, our legislation, which calls for redeployment, says that the forces will be there for three reasons: force training Iraqis, of course protecting our own forces, and counterterrorism operations. And of course I think that while it doesn't need to be in the legislation, we already have bases in Iraq. We could have bases. We would have, of course, special operations forces in all those bases, and we would be ready to move at a very quick time. We are now an occupying force in Iraq, and the sooner that ends, the better off we will all be in the whole region. As the Iraq Study Group has said, first thing that needs to be done is a regional conference. Have, as the Iraq Study Group said, have the United States meet with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, and yes, Iran, to sit down and see what we can do to resolve the issues that are so ugly in Iraq.
Thousands of Iraqis who worked for the CPA in 2003 now live under threat of death by insurgents who consider them traitors. Ought the United States to offer them some sort of asylum or refugee status?
We have done a very poor job. Iraqis who have come to our country are in the dozens, not hundreds, through our immigration policies. And of course, we need to look at this whole area. And we're going to do that, Lee. We're going to take up the last 2 weeks of this work session, the last 2 weeks in May, we're going to take up comprehensive immigration reform. And one of the areas we're going to have to look is what do we do with the problem that has been created in Iraq.
Does the plan you have outlined today entail the possibility of continued U.S. bases or a military presence in Iraq after 2008?
I think we should not have bases in Iraq. I think that we can do, as I've indicated earlier, by the bases we already have them in Kuwait, and certainly maybe we could have other countries there, for example, Jordan, allow us to have bases that we could move very quickly. It's something we could do, I think, with not a lot of trouble. I think we need to get our presence out of Iraq so that we will not be seen as an occupying force.
Turning to Afghanistan, how do you think things are going, and what is needed to improve the situation?
As I mentioned in my prepared remarks, I think it's very important that we focus on Afghanistan more than what we have done. We let the people, in my opinion, down in Afghanistan the first go-around. We shouldn't do it twice. The Taliban, because of the limited number of military there, has been able to rebuild. NATO's there. We have to play a bigger part in the NATO operation and what we're doing there than has been done in the past. Afghanistan is a place that a lot of progress can be made, but it's going to take more resources from a manpower perspective and a money perspective than what we've done in the past.
Senator Reid, as a political fact, wouldn't you welcome a presidential veto as the next step in the debate?
No.
If the United States withdraws its military from Iraq and the country collapses into civil war and chaos, only to be taken over by al-Qaeda, what should the United States do, if anything, to this terrorist threat, frontline threat in the Middle East?
Lee, I'm sure there are different degrees of civil war. We know this is an intractable civil war that's going on there now. Many experts have said that once we are no longer an occupying force there, al-Qaeda will have no enemy, that the Iraqi people would do everything necessary to get rid of them. I say, as I said earlier, that's why we need to have redeployment, so that we focus on the things I mentioned, but remember I focused very strongly on counterterrorism. We have to be able, if there are al-Qaeda cells developed there, to be able to move from our bases that would be in the surrounding region to move quickly with special operation forces, helicopters, and other aircraft to take out these cells. Prior to the invasion of Iraq, of course, there was no al-Qaeda or terrorists in Iraq. They're there now, and it's going to be a problem in the future, and I think we can handle them with the democratic plan that has been put together.
The focus, I think we have two more questions, and we'll conclude. The senator has to leave about 12:45. The focus has been on Iraq, but the real threat is from radicals worldwide. All evidence shows our presence in Iraq is counterproductive to that effort to isolate those insurgents. I guess the question is our presence counterproductive to that effort to isolate the
What we have
insurgents?
done in Iraq has done so much, it'll take generations to overcome the damage done to America and international community. As I indicated, Congressman, I will never forget that meeting that I had upstairs with you and Governor Kane when I asked the question, who are these people? And you proceeded to tell me who they are, how many of them are. There aren't that many. The only thing we can do is capture or kill them. Can't educate them. There's no diplomacy. The problem is the millions of people around the world who tend to relate to them. And we as Americans have to move forward. I mean, think about our foreign policy. As Majority Leader, I took my first trip to Latin America. 7 senators. To Bolivia, they can never, ever remember a Senate delegation or a congressional delegation going to Bolivia. We went to Ecuador, we went to Peru. In those 3 countries, there are thousands of Cuban doctors. There are thousands, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of teachers being paid for by Chavez from Venezuela. What are we doing? We have a handful of Peace Corps volunteers. We must, as I said in my prepared remarks, let the world know who we are, how good we are. And people have lost track of that. Ask anyone that takes a foreign trip. Ask anyone that takes a foreign trip how people feel about America because of this war. So we have a long road to go, big hill to climb, but as America can do this. But let's do what we do best. It's not fighting a war in Iraq.
Okay, the final note was not a question at all. It is simply to ask you to remain in your seats while Senator Reid leaves and departs for the Hill. Let's express our appreciation to Senator Reid for his remarks and thank him for coming to the Senate.